The Oklahoma City Thunder have a brighter future than you may think. Ever since moving on from Russell Westbrook and Paul George, the Thunder have done a tremendous job at acquiring as many draft picks as they possibly could. And at this point, solely due to the amount of draft picks they have going forward, people are extremely excited about their future. But also when you look at some of the guys they have on the roster, there's a ton of reasons to be excited for this team. But I think the Thunder have shown some things this season that would benefit them tremendously going forward. And I think they have even more promise than people are giving them credit for, and people are already very excited about the Thunder. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. Over the past 10 or so seasons, the OKC Thunder was always seen as one of the better teams in the NBA. They were consistently making the playoffs each and every season, and they were always a legitimate championship contender. Now obviously certain seasons they had better runs than others, but at the end of the day, if there is one thing you can count on from the Thunder, is they were always going to be competitive in the playoffs. Now after having a decent amount of success, unfortunately for the Thunder, in 2016, Kevin Durant decided to leave for the Golden State Warriors, and although the Thunder did bring in Paul George a couple years later to put alongside Russell Westbrook, that never truly panned out. They made the playoffs each and every season, but in terms of playoff success, they didn't necessarily have the most of that. So after a few years of their experiment with Russell Westbrook and Paul George, they decided to move on from both of them and just completely start over. Now luckily for the Thunder, they were able to get a ton in return, and they were able to get a nice jump start. And the crown jewel that they were able to get in those deals was certainly SGA. Now at this point, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is certainly the best player on this team, and hopefully for the Thunder's sake, they can keep him long term. But the positive assets that the Thunder got in return for Paul George and Russell Westbrook doesn't stop with SGA. They were also able to acquire an ungodly amount of draft picks going forward. And there's been a couple of other teams that have been in similar situations where they had really good star players on the roster and needed to trade them away, and they were able to get a decent amount of draft picks in return. The Utah Jazz comes to mind when thinking about this, but at the end of the day, nobody has done it as well as the OKC Thunder were able to do it. But the great thing is, besides the draft picks the Thunder have going forward, besides SGA, they also have a bunch of other reasons to be excited. For example, they have guys like Josh Giddey and Chet Holmgren, who I personally am very excited about going forward, alongside with a bunch of other nice young players. And at this point, I see the Thunder as a young, talented team that's also very competitive in the Western Conference. And although they were playing a little bit better earlier on in the season, and they have dropped off a little bit from that, I still am extremely impressed about what the Thunder are able to do this year, considering they're extremely early on into their rebuild. But now, the question is, why am I and so many other people extremely excited about the OKC Thunder's future? Well, it comes down to a bunch of different factors, but the main factor for any team is always going to be talent level. And when you look at the caliber of players that the Thunder already have on the roster, they're off to a pretty good start. Of course, they have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who I touched upon before, also Josh Giddey, and Chet Holmgren. Those are their three main guys they have on this roster. Now even besides those guys, they do have some really nice supplementary guys, and even some other nice young players that are a little bit better than supplementary guys. But of course, the most exciting parts about this Thunder roster are Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Josh Giddey, and Chet Holmgren when he comes back next season. But the next factor for why I'm extremely excited about the Thunder going forward is due to the play they've been showing so far. Now as I mentioned before, the Thunder were playing a little bit better at the beginning of the season, but either way, the fact that they are relatively competitive in the Western Conference is of course a great sign. Because if the Thunder could play at this level at this point, just imagine how good they can get in 2 or 3 seasons, when some of their draft picks convey, and even some of the younger guys they already have on the roster would have 2 or 3 more seasons under their belt. And of course, typically when you talk about young teams, they only get better with time. And I do think the Thunder have a bunch of those caliber players on their roster, young guys that also have a lot of potential. And even going forward down the road, if the Thunder see an opportunity to to trade away some of those draft picks for a star in return, of course they can do that as well. Now, the last reason for why I think the Thunder have a brighter future than people are giving them credit for is due to their management. Now, you could be in the best position possible, having a ton of draft picks, having a ton of nice young players, but if you don't have the right management in place, you're probably not going to be all that successful. But when you talk about someone like Sam Presti, he's been a guy who has a proven track record. He does phenomenally in the trade market, he does tremendously well in drafting, and overall Sam Presti is exactly who you want to have at the top of your ticket. And having a guy like that at the top really gives me a ton of confidence about the Thunder going forward, because I'm extremely confident that with those draft picks that the Thunder have, they're either going to draft a really good player or they're going to trade it away for a star in return. And when you have as many assets as the Thunder have, who knows, maybe the Thunder could be a legitimate playoff team by next season or the season after, and then they look to get even better by trading those picks and trying to get stars in return. Things can move very quickly when you're in the Thunder's position, a team that's very talented right now with young players, but also has a ton of assets as well. But now, what do I mean when I say the Thunder have a better future than a lot of people give them credit for? Now, obviously, as I mentioned before in the video, basically everybody expects the Thunder to have a very bright future. They see a lot of the young guys the Thunder have currently, and they're very excited about them, and also, of course, they see those draft picks, and you can just assume the Thunder will be pretty good in the next 5 or so seasons. But in my opinion, I think people were a lot more excited at the beginning of the season when the Thunder were playing really well, and ever since they started to fall off a little bit, people got a lot less excited about them. But in my opinion, you still have to understand they're very early on into the rebuild process, and honestly, I'm equally as excited as I was at the beginning of the year compared to now, because the end game isn't this season for the Thunder. Obviously, you're expecting them to get really good in the next 3 or 4 years, so having the experience of playing relatively well at this point is certainly a huge win for them. And as I quickly touch upon, if the Thunder slowly start to progress, maybe they miss the playoffs this year, lose the play-in game, but next year if they make the playoffs and they're a top 6 seed, things can move very, very quickly for them. Because at that point, maybe the Thunder look to trade away some of their draft picks they have in order to bring in some nice supplementary guys. Maybe they look to bring in a really nice starting level player. Maybe they even look to bring in a star. Who knows? The opportunities are literally endless when you have the amount of draft picks that the Thunder have alongside with the young talent that they have. Sam Presti definitely has a lot of things to work with, and it would be very interesting to see where they go, because I definitely do think they can move a lot quicker than a lot of people will give them the credit for. But within the next 3 or 4 seasons, I definitely would expect the Thunder to be legitimate championship contenders. Now, that might sound a little bit early considering they just started the rebuild process, but I think based upon how well they have him playing this year alongside with a couple years before, I definitely don't think it's unrealistic to expect that, because with these young players, they're going to get better very quickly, and I do think the growth is going to be exponential with this team. Now, one thing that I also want to mention is there have been some reports about the Thunder potentially trading away Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and although they probably would get a ton in return, I don't necessarily think this is the best idea. Whenever you have a young point guard like SGA playing at the level that he's playing at, those players are very difficult to move on from. And if it were up to me, I would definitely look to keep him to put alongside the already really good young core they have. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening going forward. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the OKC Thunder have a brighter future than people are giving them credit for, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.